This is the latrine. It's flooded, and the tube wells are underwater. The trees are breaking up, and the flood water's coming into the house. Here it says, flood water is polluted. Don't drink this water.
The need for good disaster risk reduction work has never been more urgent. This means reducing the vulnerability of communities at risk so that when hazards like floods and droughts occur, they're better able to resist and recover. With climate change, urbanization, and population growth increasing their vulnerability, the lives and livelihoods of billions of people are at stake.
If we get even less rain than we're getting now, it'll be a catastrophe. We won't even have enough to eat, and without enough food, we can't work.
The water started like a spring. Suddenly there was water coming through the windows, and then a wave went over the house.
When the flood comes, everything you see here is completely underwater.
Is it my fault? Is it something I did that made the mudslide come and destroy everything?
The question is, disaster will come, only more of them, more frequent of them, more severe. Now, what are we going to do about it? There has to be a comprehensive program to address disasters. Focus more resourced, more training, better warnings, and all that goes with it.
The need for better DRR work was recognized in 2005, when 168 countries adopted the Hyogo Framework for Action. But progress has been slow and resources lacking. This has to change. Communities at risk are the first to respond when disaster strikes. The best way to help them build up their resilience is to listen to them.
This is how high the floodwater came last year, all over the village.
By doing a joint assessment with the community, NGOs can learn about local coping strategies and expertise.
This tube well gets completely covered in floodwater, so we seal off the top of it to keep the contamination out.
The community comes together to map out risk areas. They form a committee responsible for disaster management and decide on their own priorities.
Having a disaster committee means we can do things as a group instead of each person just thinking of themselves. We share our ideas and our problems. When it floods, the houses get washed away and our lives are just so miserable. But now we feel we have some strength to fall back on.
We've been working to build up a feeling of unity in the village and to form a committee. Now that's happened, they're deciding on their own priorities and which problems to tackle first. We'll support them for a reasonable amount of time, then we'll move out, and they'll carry on the process by themselves.
In this part of Burkina Faso, farmers were experiencing increasingly severe drought and couldn't find water even after digging 30 to 40 meters.
We used to get water from wells to grow our crops, but then we just couldn't get enough. So we asked the local NGO here to help us get a dam. They said if we got organised, they'd support us financially, but we'd have to donate our labour to build the dam. So we said yes, and now we have a dam.
Once the dam was built, each farmer dug a canal to channel the water to his or her individual plot to irrigate the crops. In addition, the community elected a committee to manage the dam and the land development. Women farmers were the majority of the beneficiaries, but have less authority here, so at least 2 seats on the committee were reserved for them. Before the dam, when there was a drought, there was famine. Now, farming on this land supports over 6,000 people, and after the last drought, they had a good harvest, while other villages lost their crops.
Disaster risk reduction can be looked at as an insurance policy. Ensuring that all the finances that have been pumped into the developing world are safeguarded.
Government owes a duty of care to people living on the front line. It's the responsibility of government to develop robust policies on disaster risk reduction and to ensure these are implemented. This has to happen through partnerships at all levels, which are accountable to communities and all other stakeholders. 2000, Mozambique suffered the worst floods in living memory, caused by severe rainfall and tropical cyclone. In situations like this, early warnings can save many lives. Unfortunately, decades of civil war had left Mozambique's monitoring institutions in disrepair, and many people who did receive a warning didn't evacuate until the last minute, when it was too late. 800 people died.
One of the main factors which actually ends up saving lives is how organized the community is actually to react when a disaster occurs. So the tendency when you don't have a structure is that everybody will, do what they think is best to do.
To prevent the kind of damage caused in 2000, the government is now working with NGOs, donors, scientists and communities to develop a national early warning and response system. With new technology, meteorologists can predict when and where a cyclone might hit and issue warnings using television, the internet and radio. Having good early warnings doesn't automatically mean people know what to do with them. So communities at risk are forming disaster preparedness committees with the help of NGOs. In contrast to the high-tech prediction equipment, the tools for this job are as simple as wind-up radios, whistles and bicycles. These systems were tested in the floods of 2007, and this time, people knew what to do when the warnings came. There were no deaths by drowning or any major outbreak of diseases. Successes like this show that government can take the lead in partnerships that prevent an extreme weather event turning into a full-scale disaster.
It's not an environmental problem. It is an environment, development, disaster, society planning problem. It's an integrated problem of the whole gamut of governance.
Honduras, like Mozambique, is vulnerable to tropical storms. But in mountainous parts of the country, evacuation isn't enough. Poor land management means there's widespread deforestation, causing landslides and floods in the wake of a storm. This called for a different kind of partnership. So, with government support, technical advisors from the UN and local farmers found a way to reduce deforestation in one of the poorest parts of the country, Lempira.
When we arrived in Lempira in 1992, there were only 16,000 hectares of forest, but 1,000 were being destroyed every year. At that rate, we wouldn't have a forest left.
Before, we used to cut up the vegetation and burn it completely. But the land is very steep, so in the rainy season, it all washes down the mountain.
The technical advisors work with farmers to develop a new method called zero tillage, incorporating the traditional indigenous practice of leaving corridors of trees and planting in between them. This helps keep the soil shaded, allows moisture to penetrate, and reduces runoff in a storm.
Here, where the earth floor is not protected, it's hard like stone. You can easily see the difference between the effects of a drop of water falling on here and on here.
These changes reduce the risk of landslides and improve the livelihoods of farmers, and therefore the local economy as well.
I don't get income from anything else. I have to earn the money from farming to feed my family and educate my children. The way we work the land now is much better than before. 2,000 times better.
These local voices must be translated into global action. DRR policy won't trickle down to vulnerable people unless it's carried out through accountable partnerships backed up by political will and financial commitment. What can you do to ensure that this happens?